Hello, everyone, and welcome to this panel titled Women as Learners. I am Caroline Alfonso. I am the education reporter at the Globe and Mail, and I am your moderator for the next hour. Over the next hour, this panel will discuss the impact on learning for girls in elementary and secondary school during the school closures, and how young women in post-secondary education face more challenges because of the pandemic. So I'm going to start with introducing you to our panelists. I'm going to start with Catherine Hack. Catherine Hack is a professor in the Department of Economic Science at the University of Montreal in Quebec. Dr. Hack's research focuses on the human capital development of children and youth. Her goal is to understand which programs and interventions best help children attain their full potential using causal inference techniques. We also have Elizabeth Dewey. Elizabeth Dewey is an associate professor of economics at the University of Toronto. Her work studies education and labor markets. Professor Dewey serves as the chair of the Canadian Women Economists Committee. She's also the co-director of Future Skills Research Lab and the academic director of the Research Initiative on Education and Skills. We also have joining us today is Kelly Foley. Kelly is an associate professor in the Department of Economics at the University of Saskatchewan. Dr. Foley's research focuses on how education and training affect inequality and economic well-being. The ways in which disadvantage persists across generations is a common theme of her work. And finally, joining us today is Christine Neal. Christine is an associate professor at Wilfrid Laurier University. Dr. Neal's research focuses on the impact of household finances on post-secondary education decisions, including access and attendance, dropout, and work while studying. Welcome, everybody. So we will begin our discussion with a question that I will pose with each of our panelists, and then we will move on to a more general discussion. And we welcome your questions. Please post them, and we will get to hopefully all of them this evening, just by typing them in on the side. So Catherine, we're going to start with you, the discussion with you. So can you please, just to bring us in, can you please share an overview of the data and the research, both internationally and in Canada, on the impact of school closures on elementary students, on high school students, particularly on girls, around that issue?
Yes, thank you, Carolyn. So if we think about school closures as they happened first in the spring of 2020, we have to think both about the parents and the kids. So if we first think about the parents, in terms of the parents in Canada, we do have data, so we were able to look at that. If we think about the kids, then you'll see it will be a slightly different story because we don't have such good data. So if we think about the parents and we look at the impact of school closures, what we can do is exploit differences across Canada. So in the spring of 2020, most of the schools remained closed across the country, except in Quebec, outside of Montreal, where schools were reopened at the end of the spring of 2020. So because of that, we were able to use data on the labor force participation of parents to look at what happened to those parents who were now able to send their kids back to school. And what we saw in the data is that mothers in a dual parent family were more able to work, to be at work. So their participation at work increased by 9 percentage points, and they were able to work more hours. But where it really had an impact for mothers, it was for single mothers. So we see that when we reopen school in the spring, single mothers are more able to work by an impact of 21, 22 percentage points. So it's huge, it's really big. And they are able to put in 8 more hours per week of work. So this impact is large, and it's mainly concentrated on single mothers, but it also had an impact on mothers in dual parent household. And when we look at what happened in January, because in January, the whole country was open, but Southern Ontario was closed. So we can again look at differences there. And what we see again is that single mothers in areas where schools were open were more able to work and put in more hours of work. So there was a large impact on the labor force participation of mothers of closing down primary schools. Now, if we think about the kids, then it's hard because in Canada, although we're a super rich country, we're clearly data poor when it comes to kids. So we don't have good data, micro data I'm talking about on kids. The last survey that was run by Statistics Canada was done in 2019. So it's prior to the pandemic. And I can come back to that, but there's a plan to run the survey again in 2023. But researchers had to put their heads together, get funding to get this started. So it was not an initiative run by the federal government to start with. Now, yes, but to start with, no. So what we did instead, when the pandemic started, because we couldn't have data, we read all of the research that had been done about school interruption, and we were able to put together a paper that was predicting what we were expecting to happen in Canada. And our prediction was that school closure would increase inequality in test scores. And since then, a few countries have been able to do really good work. I'm talking here about Belgium and the Netherlands. They've used like administrative data on kids and before and after the pandemics, and they're able to document really the impact of the closures on kids. And what they see is that the impact on kids is comparable for boys and girls. It's also comparable generally across subjects, except in science where the impact is not as high, but in like math, reading, spelling, Dutch or French, it's the impact is comparable. But where they see something different is when you look at kids born in to mothers who have a lower level of education or living in a neighborhood with mothers who have a lower level of education. There you see that kids are falling behind more. So this also suggests that there will be an increase in inequality. And they have a follow-up paper that shows that the effects are continuing over time. So there really needs to be something done to address those effects and bring kids back to where they should have been. And so if we think about Canada, what we've done, seeing that we wouldn't have data, what we've done in Quebec is we run not an experiment, but we had like 10,000 kids pass a test in June 2021, a test for which we had data in 2019. And we're starting to put this data together, but it really relates only to kids in Quebec. Unfortunately, we were not able to do this for the whole country. But what we see is we also see that kids at the bottom of the distribution are falling behind. Our preliminary results suggest that also. So what we see seems to be in line with what other countries with good data have seen. So for now, that's what we know. I think we'll know more once data starts to come in. And Canada is participating in PISA, in TIMSS, in PEARL. So we'll get more data thanks to those international initiatives.
Thank you, Catherine. We'll come back to some of those points later on, hopefully, especially that Quebec study that you're working on. Elizabeth, can you take us into what these impacts, the pandemic closures and subsequent impacts have had on childcare and what we have seen in the early years of schooling as a result of it?
Yeah, so I think that COVID in general has sort of exposed to Canada and most of the citizens sort of the fact that we have this chronically inadequate childcare infrastructure. And it has a huge effect in a lot of different ways, right? So first, during the first wave of COVID, we know that childcare programs were shut down from provincial and territorial orders. But then what happened after that is the real problem. So basically, these childcare centers are run on really low margins. And when they got back up and running, or they're allowed to run, less students decided to go, less children, and there was concern about fees because a lot of parents weren't working. And so there's a huge decline in enrollment. And then that led to huge decline in childcare centers and unlicensed care. And so it's sort of been the snowball effect. We've seen about a 22% decline in kids in care from January 2020 to January 2021. And why does this all matter? Well, not surprisingly, this affects how the ability of families to work, right? If you don't have childcare, you are not going to be working as much. You might have to change your work schedule. You might have to work fewer hours, or even postpone returning to the labor market. And we saw all this stuff going on. So it was sort of in the background, there's this huge shift in the childcare industry. And how does this affect women? Well, we know prior to all of this that women do more of the household work. They care for the children at a higher percentage of their time. So basically, women are tending to perform a much larger share of the parental tasks than men. And when the childcare shut down, what happened? Well, it was found that men who are working at home did increase a little bit of their share of work, but not nearly the same as women. So this had a disproportional effect on women and women who are working. The other point that I don't think has come out too much that people haven't talked about is that sort of, childcare workers are almost exclusively female, and they were on the front lines during, the beginning of the pandemic through today. And there was a quote at some point, I couldn't figure out where it came from, but I remember a childcare worker saying, "Nobody's clapping for us." And what we're doing and what's going on is that we're putting already precarious, marginalized females and even more marginalized situation because their childcare centers are closing. And so they don't have a place to work. And these are people, again, sort of living on razor thin incomes. And finally, I think the thing that is exposed is sort of childcare and early childhood education is a huge, great equalizer. So if you have, kids who are at need, have different kinds of needs, they can go to early childhood center and their development, we've shown, has had increases, right? And what's going to happen here is that without, the people who can't afford the private care, the pods and all that kind of stuff, their kids are going to be left behind. So sort of adding on to sort of the inequality that's going through the schools being shut down, we're going to probably see the same thing with childcare centers and their effect on development. So I think, overall, this has had a huge impact on early care. And I don't think, I think the repercussions are going to go on for year after year.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Kelly, I just wanted to move into the later years of schooling and what we've seen with high school students and going into the post-secondary education world. What have been some of those impacts that we've seen there?
Thanks for that question, Caroline. Let's start by talking about high school students who graduated in 2020 and 2021, but did not go on to post-secondary. So that's a group for whom there was actually very little support coming from federal emergency benefits. So for example, these young people were not eligible for the Canada Emergency Student Benefit, and they were facing a very tough labor market. We've known for quite a while that when male students graduate from post-secondary during recessions, their earnings are on average lower when compared to similar students graduating during more prosperous times. And more recent research has just coming out from Statistics Canada confirms that this is also true for high school graduates and for women. So the StatsCan researchers, they estimate that for young women who graduated from high school in 2021, on average, over the next 5 years, their earnings will be about 13% lower because of the COVID-19 economic downturn. So we're going to see something similar for young men who were 2021 high school graduates. They will also tend to earn less, but the effects will not be as big. That's what the estimates are suggesting. So for young men, that estimate is going to just below 9%. So, and this is part of a pattern. The consequences of entering the labor market with lower levels of education are much more severe for women. If we go back to the 2016 census, young women ages 18 to 29 who had a high school diploma and weren't in school earned about $21,000 on average per year. But that is 40% less than what similar men were earning. Then this gap is going to be further compounded and widened because we expect the economic fallout from the pandemic to have a larger effect on women. So next, if we turn our attention to young people who did continue their education during 2020 and 2021, we again see that COVID-19 is having a stronger effect on women. So there's some evidence that women in post-secondary rely more on work during school to finance their education. And Christine has some research that shows that when the costs of post-secondary increase, women are more likely to increase their work in response to that cost increase. So with that in mind, it's particularly problematic that COVID-19 has been disproportionately affecting women in the labor market. So we did some work comparing the employment rates of students during the post-secondary academic school year, and we compared 1 month in 2019 to the same month in either 2020 or 2021. And so we were essentially asking for people ages 20 to 29 who are currently enrolled in school, by how much did employment change during the pandemic when compared to 2019? So in April 2020, the fraction of male students who were employed and at work fell by 21 percentage points compared to April 2019. But for women, it fell by 29 percentage points. So in the summer months in 2020, we see the same thing. Employment among young women planning to return to school fell to the lowest level on record. It fell from 71% in 2019 to just roughly 51% in 2020. So, of course, the labor market has been recovering since the initial lockdown, but again, that recovery is slower for women, and that's true for women working in school as well. So by April of 2021, the fall in the fraction employed and at work relative to 2019 had shrunk to just 1 percentage point for men, but that was still around 7 percentage points for women. And the most recent numbers we have are from October, and comparing October 2021 to 2019, young men in school are actually slightly more likely to be employed and at work, but women are about 2 percentage points less likely. So we definitely have seen some improvements overall, but it's much, much slower for women who, it's important to remember, tend to rely more on work to finance their education. So I'll end by emphasizing again that whenever we think about women as learners, we have to keep in mind and remember that although women tend to have better outcomes within the education system, the consequences of not succeeding, so the consequences of not achieving very high levels of education for women is being dramatically disadvantaged in the labor market. So I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. We can explore that more in our general discussion. I'd love to. In the meantime, Christine, Kelly talked about some of the research that you have looked at around the financial impact. Can you give us a sense of how much assistance students have received, particularly women, and your thoughts on how sufficient it has been or insufficient it has been?
Sure. Well, like as Kelly said, the main thing we're concerned about at the post-secondary level for women in education is the possibility that they might not have the money to continue on with their studies and may not graduate, because again, the penalties for women who have lower levels of education are quite large relative to men. One of the advantages we have in the post-secondary world compared to the K-12 world, so the general school world, is that a lot of the problems are actually solvable with money here. You can, if the concern is the labor market has collapsed and therefore women can't find work to finance their post-secondary education, we can solve that with actually a combination of existing programs, because we've already got a great targeted financial aid program for students, right? The Canada Student Loan Program is already in place. So we could deliver aid through that, or as we did through emergency financial support, so the Canada Emergency Student Benefit. And that works for the sorts of problems that we're hitting the post-secondary system. In a way, it doesn't quite for the regular school system. right? Partly because we've got more independent learners in the post-secondary system, partly because post-secondary institutions are much more flexible than the regular school system, and partly because we already had technologies for remote learning in the post-secondary world that weren't there in the school world. So really the key issue that I think the federal government at least recognized very early on was, the financial crisis hit in March of, I should say COVID hit in March of 2020. That's when students were just gearing up to do their summer work, right? The summer employment market completely collapsed. And students rely on that summer employment for their to support them through the next year. And so the federal government stepped in with the Canada Emergency Student Benefit of $1,250 a month for any returning post-secondary students or graduating post-secondary students. And as Kelly noted, not unfortunately graduating grade 12 students, which maybe not great, but at least if you're going on to post-secondary, there was some support that would make up for the summer employment income you lost. As well, they increased the Canada student grants available through the student loan program. So those were doubled. It was announced for 2 years. The cap on student loans was increased from $210 a week to $350 a week. So for students who really were at the high need end of the financial aid distribution, there was an increase in the total amount of funding they could get. And there were changes to how the student loan program looked at income. So previously, the way it works is like effectively, the student loan program assumes that you can fund $3,000 yourself through work during the semester or during the summer. And they dropped that requirement for 2020-21. So those were pretty big changes altogether, and potentially quite expensive, although it didn't turn out to be as expensive as expected. So the CESB was budgeted to be about $5.2 billion and ended up being 2.9, I think it was, $1 billion. So the take-up rate was less than expected, possibly partly because people were using other forms of aid like the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, CERB, right? But those sorts of financial supports were there. I think we would have been, the key question about whether they worked or not is really about enrollments. If enrollments kind of fell off, that would suggest that we did have a problem with the financial aid packages, especially given that normally in a recession, you'd expect enrollments to increase. And especially in the COVID recession, when there was nothing else for post-secondary students to do. There were no jobs. You weren't going to be going off and traveling the world and backpacking or whatever, right? You were going to be, the alternative to studying was sitting in your bedroom somewhere, playing video games. It wasn't great, was it? So in that environment, you've expected enrollments to increase. If there'd been a drop, and there was a drop in the US, right? But in Canada, we did not see that. Enrollments among women went up by about 3 percentage points. If you use the labour force survey data, for men only by about 1.5 percentage points. And that meant that, in fact, with the drop in employment, you'd have expected to see the number of people not in employment or education might have increased, but for women, it only just slightly nudged up a little bit last year. So that suggests that at least we got the financial aid part of it basically right.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you for that overview, everybody. And again, if you have any questions, please post them, and we will hopefully get to all of them before the hour is up. But we're just going to open it up to a general discussion right now, and a few questions that I have for the panelists. Catherine, I was quite interested in some of the data that you're looking at about Quebec kids falling behind. I have two young children in Ontario who were home from school in March 2020 and periodically over the past year. And I'm curious as to the data that's been coming out of Quebec, partially because schools there were open longer than many other provinces. Why do you think you're seeing that there are gaps in learning as a result?
Yes. So if we think about the data that we have collected, so what we did was an effort with the Ministry of Education here in Quebec, where we were granted access to grade 4 students, for which we have a lot of information when they were kids. So we have a census of kindergarten kids that runs every 5 years. So we use one of those birth cohort, because the goal here is to create this massive database of one cohort that we will follow through their educational pattern and see how the school closures, which were different in different parts of Quebec, have affected their learning capacities. So, but the data for now that we have was that we were able to access those kids and have them take a test, a reading test that had been done also in 2019, so for which we have data prior to the pandemic. So we are able to compare the test score distribution in 2021 with the test score distribution in 2019. And as of now, the data is still coming in, so it's really preliminary results I'm talking about. But what we see is that we do see that the kids at the bottom are having more difficulties than they did back in 2019. And from the research that we have read, this is what we were expecting. And when you think about it, it might seem small, but these effects can be very damaging in the long run. So there's been a few studies done, and very good studies, well done studies, about the long-term impact of school interruption, long school interruption of the size that we have observed here during this pandemic. And we see that kids impacted by these large school interruption will have a lower high school graduation rate. So you can think about it as like 200 students less will graduate from high school out of 1,000, and a lower university graduation rate, also a salary loss of 2 to 3% annually, a total income, family income loss. And there's also they have also documented an intergenerational impact. So the kids that were themselves impacted by the school interruption are also doing less well in school. So although these effects at first glance might appear small, they can have long-lasting effects. And these effects, typically the way they're documented, they're like average effects. So most kids are actually doing kind of okay, but some are doing really less well than they were. And for those kids, their life will be quite different if we do nothing about it. So we have I think as a society, we decided to close schools, and Canada has closed its school a lot longer than other similar countries. So if you think about Belgium and the Netherlands, which I was referring to before, they closed for full-time closure, lasted 8 to 9 weeks. We're more at 13 weeks, and in some provinces more than that. So if you think about it that way, you have to really realize that those kids have paid a price, and that we have to invest in them now to remediate what we have caused by closing down schools. And as of now, what I see is that teachers are doing their very best to compensate, but there's not really much more investment that's going to the K-12 system to help them compensate for the learning losses that have accumulated throughout the pandemics. So I think, if you think about it, a lot of kids will be okay, but we really had to think about those kids that are not doing so well. And if you look at Canada in terms of inequality and test score distribution, you look at, like, for example, PISA data, we do have inequality. We had inequality before the pandemic, and it was pretty stable over time. So now think about it, it has increased. And it's really because the bottom has moved further behind. So we have a duty as a country to bring them back in.
We don't have, Catherine, Elizabeth, feel free to step in, but we don't have as much, as you said earlier, Catherine, we don't have as much data in Canada on how kids have fared over this time. You know, a lot of the provincial standardized testing was paused, so we don't have any, even samples, you know, were not done. But what have you seen as far as how governments have invested in recovery? And would you draw from any sort of international governments on how they have done it, and whether we should be doing it in a similar way? If anybody wants to jump in, yes.
I can start with the data piece. So if you take a country like Belgium, what they've done, like this last June, they've run their test again, the exact same test for all of their kids to see what was going on. So in all of the subject matter, they've run the same test to see what was going on and where they had problems. So in terms of, if I look at what we've done in Quebec, we have done none of this. There was no standardized test except for the project that we led. I think in other provinces, we're seeing similar patterns.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think somehow we're kind of like hiding our head in the sand or something and trying to forget that something's happening and that these kids are struggling. And I don't quite understand why we are not feeling more of an emergency to document who's struggling and who's not.
Yeah, I completely agree. We haven't invested anything, I think, anywhere in Canada. Like we should be pouring money into the school system. I completely agree that we asked for a huge burden from the kids and to open up the economy. And now we haven't really done anything in return to bring up that bottom. And I think it's because people just like to ignore the situation. And I don't think they understand that this will actually impact them long term. Like it's not actually in good interest. Like if I'm going to be completely selfish, I want all those kids to be doing better because they're going to be making more money. They're going to have more innovation. We're going to have more economic growth. And so it's actually like, for me personally, if I'm going to be completely selfish, it's actually doing us a huge disservice as Canadian society to be ignoring those kids. So I don't think we've done any remediation that I'm really aware of. We've cut budgets in some provinces. So I think this is a huge problem. People want to think that, the kids will be all right, they're resilient. And, that's true to an extent, but it's going to be a problem. There are kids that are being left behind and we're going to be in a much more unequal society. And I don't think that's where we want to be.
Have you seen, sorry, yes, Kelly, please.
Sorry, I just wanted to add on to that.
Of course.
There's been some debate in the research community over the last decades about whether funding to schools actually improves kids' outcomes. And there's some very good evidence coming from the US that it has very substantial effects, actually, that a researcher called Kirabo Jackson from the US has shown that increasing funding to school can increase students' wages later on in their life. And those improvements are focused on lower income kids. So investing in the younger, the K to 12 is really where you can have the biggest impacts on inequality. Because also related to some of the things that Christine was saying is that the barriers to university and post-secondary that are financial, we actually have pretty good instruments for dealing with that. So that the actual barriers that are still in place is having the academic achievement all the way through K to 12 that prepares you to go to PSE and be successful. And we know that if a dollar invested in the younger years just compounds through kids' developments. And so, again, agreeing with how little money has been invested in remediating the very severe impacts on students' learning. It really is very problematic and potentially like having a generational effect.
What have we seen, from provinces like Quebec and Ontario that have done, I feel like some investments, but what have you seen there?
Well, if I can speak about Quebec, there was some investment done to remediate, but the amounts are quite small. And what we have to think about, I think it's the case also in all of Canada, is we have a labor shortage. So we don't have more people to be able to work in the education system. So we also have that problem of having a labor shortage, which doesn't allow us to do as much as what we would like to. But in any case, even if we have this labor shortage, if there was money invested in the system to help attract more people, we would be able to provide some good remediation intervention. And Philip Oreopoulos at the University of Toronto has done a fantastic literature review about tutoring and what works, what doesn't work. And we know what works, what doesn't work. So we know how to help kids who are in needs using these different interventions. So there are solutions out there that we can implement, but we need policymakers to want to really make it happen. So they have done some of it, but it's not really a big commitment to make a real change in the kid's life. So if you talk to different teachers in different schools, they will say that they see very little difference compared to what they have seen in the past. In Quebec, one thing that's good that we've done is that we have increased teachers' salaries significantly this past year to recognize the tremendous work they're doing. We were the worst probably in the country, so we had a great amount to catch up. So that's good, but that's not enough. So there's really much more that needs to be done for these kids to be able to catch up.
Yeah, I would like to see how much of the money has gone to remediation and learning versus health behaviors and sort of pandemic theater and hand sanitizer and all that. So like, I haven't had a convincing in Ontario feeling about really, has there been an increased, investment in this world. And by, you remarked about the fact that we don't have EQAO, the test scores, which are the standardized test scores in Ontario. And I don't think that's a coincidence, right? Because now we won't be able to say that it's failed, right? We can't say that, there is a learning loss. So now we just sort of go back to, pretending that maybe it's okay, and then we'll get more hand sanitizer and more face shields and everything will be okay. But I don't think there's really any evidence of real commitment to remediation. And, the tutoring is a fine example that we know it works. This has been well studied. This is something we could be pumping money into, but haven't got there yet.
And if I could just add to we know even before the pandemic that there was a huge discrepancy in funding to on reserve schools for federal funding. And so when we see these sort of increases, these kind of improvements in funding, we really have to ask ourselves, are they large enough to compensate for the sort of the history of inadequate funding? So it's not just about remediating COVID-19. We also have to remediate for decades of underfunding. So even the existing inequalities in the K-12 system are quite severe. And we don't like to think about that in Canada, that we have inequality, but it's true, it's there.
Thank you. Sorry, I disconnected for a minute, everybody. I'm back. Christine, you had mentioned you were talking about the participation of women in post-secondary. And sorry, did you say there wasn't as much of change?
We actually saw an increase in, it's full-time school enrollment. So it includes some younger kids who might still be in high school, because we don't have an exact age group breakdown for post-secondary and secondary these days in the labour force survey. But women actually saw a bit of an uptick in their total full-time enrollment rates in 2020 compared with 2019, in September, October 2020 compared with 2019. And then it fell back a little bit again, actually, in 2021. So that's probably, it was especially among slightly older women, so the 22 to 24-year-old kind of range. So people kind of sticking around in university for a bit long, or college for a bit longer, doing an extra diploma or something like that, when they might normally have been trying to find a job somewhere, probably. But at least, they were able to do something productive with that year, where they might not have been able to had they been looking for a job, and that was the only option for them. So that was a little bit protective, at least for that group of students, that without that ability to substitute from work into education, life would have been not great for that year, and long run not as good either, because of that graduating in a recession effect that Kelly was talking about. That's been helpful. I might add, I'm going to support everyone else who's pointing to the inadequacies of our policy response in the K-12 system here. Universities, okay, I don't think you talk to any university professor, as we all are here, and they'll say, oh yeah, it's been, a bed of roses for the last year. It hasn't been. No one is very happy. But compared to the challenges in the school system, we did have it easy, right? We did have remote technologies that students could use. We do have students who are more used to independent learning and who are older. Our students do not have to be looked after by their parents, mostly, while their parents are home from work. Depends on the kid, but most 18-year-olds can kind of look after themselves after the hour of noon or something through to 2 a.m. or whatever. That meant that the challenges in the post-secondary system just weren't as big as those in the K-12 system. At the same time, the independence of the post-secondary sector meant that policy responses were actually faster fairly often than they were in the K-12 sector. You had individual institutions, like Laurentian was the first university or post-secondary institution in Canada to close down to in-person learning. They moved, and then everyone else followed very quickly. Equally, Seneca College this summer was the first institution to institute a vaccine mandate on campus, when the Ontario government and other governments around Canada were very reluctant to make any such moves. And and then others, of course, followed suit as well. So that dynamic exists in the post-secondary sector. It doesn't in the K-12 sector, where you really just do have to take the government policies and work with those, right? And so when the government is trying to coordinate all over multiple different school boards and develop policies and work through cabinet, right, the policy responses were just slower at the K-12 level. Mm-hmm. It's also the case that the universities, their risk assessment was quite different than the K-12 sector, right? So the cost of going remote was lower, but the risks of staying in person were also higher, right? So it was a much easier decision to move to remote learning. Really, if you looked at trying to balance across the sectors, the universities and colleges should have been the first to close and the last to open, and the schools should have been the opposite. And at least we got that right in the post-secondary system, which, probably did help to reduce spread of COVID in the rough times, right? Because I think someone described university residences as land-based cruise ships for the amount of interactions between people. And that was really a concern, right, that we saw. And universities did respond very quickly to that, as did colleges, of course. And so, the whole response was quite different. And I think our universities and colleges did a really good job responding to the pandemic. Equally, we don't have as much remediation to do, right? The loss of in-person learning is just not as severe for post-secondary students. It's not great, right? There are lots of problems still that we need to deal with, I think, but it's not at the same level of very young students who can't deal with technology all day, even if their parents are there to look after them, and who really need to work on their socialization skills, right? That's not as critical a thing for a 20-year-old who hopefully has some social skills already as it is for a 5-year-old, right? And that sort of thing does contribute to that issue of higher returns to early education that Kelly was talking about. So, right, all of the challenges that we have, like the policy response wasn't as strong in the K-12 sector, and the costs of losing in-person learning were greater than the K-12 sector. We really need to be making sure, depending on whether we get further waves, that we keep schools open, right? They need to not shut down anymore. We need to make sure we've got good ways of keeping schools open, rapid testing, whatever protocols it takes. We need to think about those now and then think about longer term remediation work.
Is anybody doing, that you have seen, some remediation work for those younger grades? It doesn't have to be in Canada. I'm just looking internationally as well. I'll take it the answer is no, since nobody's responding to that question. Catherine, did you want to jump in?
Well, I think there are efforts to do remediation, but it's more at the teachers level, right? So teachers are doing tremendous work to help with this. So I think there are significant efforts that are going through at the moment in every single school across the country. But it's just that they don't have more to do, more tools, more resources to do it. So if they had more resources and tools, I don't know which tools they could use, but anyway, more human resources to do it, they would be more likely to be successful. And if we think about it, there are certain specific subject matters that need to be addressed first. So if you think about like English or French or mathematics, those are the core subject where you need to address the learning losses first. So we could target our intervention on the core subjects. And also, if you think about what Kelly said before, is that even prior to the pandemic, we had a lot of kids were not graduating from high school in time in Canada, and most certainly in Quebec. And this is a problem by itself that we've been observing for years, and that we're not really doing anything about it. We're not really investing more to get those kids in line. And where it starts, it's prior to school. So if you look at data, we have pretty good data on kindergarten children, and you look at differences when they first start kindergarten, they're massive. So already when they start kindergarten, there are large differences between kids, and these tend to persist while in school and sometimes reduce thanks to the school system. But this tells you that where you have to invest is, yes, in the K-12 right now, because there are kids right now that need help, but also invest large amount prior to the K-12 to make sure that the kids who start school have the tools or the skills that they need to succeed in school. So there are a lot of kids that start school with already a learning ability or a learning package that is much lower than other kids. So that makes their life a lot more difficult in the K-12 system. And so I think the $30 billion investment that the federal government is investing towards the childcare system is already a good step in that direction. But often we have invested in childcare, not thinking so much about quality, and especially quality in the least favorable environment. So we need to make sure that in low-income neighborhood, we get the best childcare ever. And we need to make sure that the kids who go there live in the neighborhood and are not coming from the very wealthy neighborhood. So there needs to be some sort of mechanism that allows us to invest highly in a lower income neighborhood and make sure that the kids who are there are the kids who should be there to make sure that they succeed.
What are the consequences of that we're starting to see as a result of a lack of this investments, or flying blindly, so to speak, in this area as well?
So if you think about childcare, so what we observe is that we've been observing over many decades now a high number of kids not being able to graduate from high school. And especially, I know this talk is about women, but it's especially boys who are most struggling in that area. So as Kelly was mentioning, the returns to education is much higher for women. So there's a greater incentive for women to succeed in school, and they typically do much better in school because there's a bigger incentive, and because if they don't in the labor market, they will be they will have a lower income. So it's really important for women to succeed in school, but it's equally important for men to at least obtain a high school degree and hopefully also go to post-secondary education. And we've been observing this for decades now, and we need to do something about it. And investing in childcare is a first steps towards this if we invest in high quality childcare.
Are we seeing some consequences currently as a result of the lack of investments in the K system?
Well, I think, we've been talking a little bit in the past tense about remediating, all the harm, but I feel like we haven't, and talking about the fact that it's still going on. Like in my household with a 4 and 7-year-old, sniffles, everything, like the amount of school being missed is tremendous. And that, so we need to lose sight. I poo-pooed some of the health, investments, but if we actually did this in a targeted way to keep kids in school when they actually don't have COVID and they just have their regular childhood illnesses, we could have that could actually have a huge impact on the kids and then also on the parents. Like we're sort of ignoring all the women whose careers are getting disrupted right now, who's going to have long-term impacts of their career trajectories, and then being able to provide for their kids. This move to remote learning, I have remote work, I have huge concerns about women. And, it seems like a great idea that we can be around to take care of our kids while they get sick because they can't be at school. But then, there's huge implications on their not being seen and not getting promotions. And I feel like there's just a lot of baggage all around lack of investment in K through 12 that, it's going to be, as a labor and education economist, I'll have great things to study and showing all these negative effects over the next few decades of my career. But it's pretty grim.
Yeah, I'm going to throw in here, I just remembered one policy change in Ontario that was perhaps not ideal. I said one of the advantages of the post-secondary system is you can throw money at the problem, and that actually does solve a lot of what the problems were, and that doesn't work in the K-12 system, right? Well, one of the first responses of the Ontario government to the schooling interruptions was give parents, what was it, $200 for all of their sacrifices and staying home? I think it was $200, something like that. That was a complete waste of money that could have been used to actually, buy rapid tests for schools so that, as soon as there's an outbreak, the school does the rapid testing and we can decide, can you, are you allowed in today or not? Oh, look, you tested positive. Maybe you can go home. But something like that could have been done. But, what we saw in Ontario instead was a real resistance to using rapid tests at schools, but handing them out to private businesses for free, right? Because, and there's this attitude out there, sorry, I'm getting slightly irritated. There's this attitude out there that if someone hands over cash or a Visa card for something, that is the economy. And things where you don't hand over cash for things are not the economy. And that is nonsense. The economy is about everyone's well-being, and how you pay for something isn't relevant. We've chosen to pay for our education system by collectively raising revenue through taxes and spending it collectively. That is still a valuable service that people are willing to pay for, do pay for, right? They just do it in a collective way rather than an individual way, because it makes more sense for education to do it that way than to each of us hand over cash to our kid's teacher or whatever, right? And this tendency to see education and health and other things that we pay for collectively as not the economy. Mm-hmm. And not just that, but then unpaid care work as not the economy, right? It just betrays a complete lack of understanding of what economics is and what it's for. And I've just been appalled at the degree to which that has been something that has driven policy over the last year and a half.
I have to say, I love this discussion because we have slightly veered off topic, but it is also enlightening. I am enjoying your views on these issues. We don't have very much longer, but I wanted to just go around to the panelists and give you a few minutes, because we've been talking about the problems and we're talking about the challenges, and I want you to sort of envision your ideal, solution. What do you want to see happen? And I know this panel is on women and learners, but let's face it, it's boys and girls, young women, young men, right? And who have had a year and a half, almost 2 years, and ongoing disruptions to their education system. So, as we move forward, as hopefully kids' vaccinations are approved over the next little while, and as we sort of move forward in the education system, what do you want to see as something that we focus on, as something governments and policymakers focus on for young kids and even going into high school and post-secondary? So each of you will have a few minutes to talk about that. Who would like to start? Yes, go ahead, Catherine.
Well, there's really two things I'd like to see. So if I look at boys and girls differences, where you see the biggest gap, it's in reading and writing. And this is where the action is, and this is where you can intervene to help boys succeed in school. So I'd like to see that in the school system, the K to 12, we make a larger investment in the reading and writing domain to make sure that we have staff that can help students who are struggling, especially boys who are struggling, but also girls who are struggling, to make sure that they get the necessary skills to pursue later on and then succeed and get a high school diploma. So that's the first thing I would focus on. So put all my extra dollar human resources into this one core subject, which would be French in Quebec and English in the rest of Canada, and some other community that speak other languages, of course. But this, getting those basic skills together to make sure that kids can succeed would be the first thing. And second, we need good data on kids. I think all mothers would agree with that. We need good data on kids to know what's going on. Who's struggling, who's fine, which dimension of their life. Kids are not in admin data unless they're extremely sick, and these data don't go to the federal level because they're held by the provinces. So at the provincial level, to get a picture of how our kids are doing, we need a really good survey that runs every 2 years that tells us how our kids are doing and if we need to do something more.
That's a good point, Catherine. I think, just to add to that quickly, we all had a glimpse into how the education system and how our kids were learning when they were at home, when they were learning online. And, having that good data, I think, is quite important. Thank you for raising that point. Elizabeth, would you like to respond next?
Catherine stole my data thing. So
well, you can build on the data. So
I know. I mean, there's not much to build other than we have to invest in good data so that we can track what's going on. I also, if my wish list would come true during this whole childcare expansion, I hope it becomes less political and more boots on the ground, figuring out how this can happen with high quality. So the focus is on quality and the focus is rolling out appropriately so that spots, when it's going to take a long time to get up to capacity, and we need to put those spots in the right places with high quality. And so forget about the politics and that, that's above my pay grade, but we need to focus on just like actual, fact of how this is going to happen and how we're going to do it with high quality care for the kids.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Christine, would you like to step in? Did I catch you off guard? Sorry.
Yes, but okay, I've got it. So I'll go on the post-secondary side a bit, I think. I said that during the pandemic, the Canada student loan limit was increased, right? The weekly limit on how much you can get in total funding, including borrowing. That's, I gather, been brought back down to its previous level. It's too low currently. It hasn't increased in over, I think a decade and a half. So, moving that back up is important. Okay, that does mean people might graduate with a bit more debt, but if you take on a bit more debt to fund post-secondary education, as we've said, especially for women, that's a big deal, right? There are high returns to that. So there's that. And then, the federal government did try to introduce this volunteering program for secondary and post-secondary students, and it was a bit of a debacle, obviously. Unlike throwing money at things, organizing a whole volunteer program takes a lot of time and effort. But, maybe that's a way of dealing with this, or at least thinking about remediation. If we can develop a much better program of having, paid volunteers, okay, in schools to help with reading and writing, right? That might be something that we should be starting to think about now when, March 2020 was not the time to do that.
Thank you, Christine. Kelly?
So I concur with everything that my colleagues have said. And because we just have very little time, I'll just say that one of the themes that I heard from some of the sessions this morning is that COVID-19 has really just shined a light on problems that we already knew were there. And with that in mind, I think the number one thing that I hope improves is the funding gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous students in Canada.
Thank you. Thank you all. I have really enjoyed this discussion, and thank you for coming and participating in it. We may have, like I said, veered away from women as learners, but I think we still incorporated it in our discussion, and it was insightful for me, and I hope our audience felt the same way. Thank you all, and have a great night.